Hello, this is Kenneth and Heather here with the Advancing Equity Coalition, here to give you our take on the discussions that took place last night at the school board meeting. How are you doing today, Heather?
Great, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. It's been a very interesting December, to say the least, already. Cases are surging. It's been tough not seeing our friends, our family for Thanksgiving, but we're pushing through.
We have a little sunshine today. That seems to help more than one would think it might.
Yeah, sunshine is it's also maybe nice enough to go on a walk. We'll see. We'll see. Let's maybe temper expectations. But anyway, so Heather, do you want to kick us off? What were some of what's your first takeaway from last night's meeting?
Well, the first takeaway that I had last night was and it really was just kind of a blip, but it was really an important thing, was that choice season is now open in Minneapolis public schools. This was our first virtual choice, right? Normally they were talking originally about bringing back a fair and really celebrating and talking about what would be different with our magnet schools. And because of COVID, a lot of that had to be altered. And so, community engagement looks very different during COVID. If you haven't been to MPS's website to take a virtual school tour of potential schools, that is totally worth your time right now. So go do that and learn more about your school choices for this coming school year.
Yep, and make sure you really intentionally reach out to to other families of color, because this is really supposed to be a time where families of color make their decisions, especially just because historically we know that families of color have not gotten their first or second choice. And so I believe the choice season ends in beginning of February, I want to say. So you still have about 8 weeks left, but don't wait. Make your choices now, and get excited about what potential schools you could be going to next year.
We filled ours out this weekend, and it kind of feels like a big relief. Like, after all this time of thinking about possible change and what if it's worse and what if it's not as good and can my kid move, it kind of felt like, okay, this is happening. You guys are moving either here or here, and next thing to start worrying about.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about, what were some of the things that you considered as you were making your final decisions?
I'll be really personal with this. Part of my decisions were really about my kids, because I still have twins, and they're going to be 8th graders, so they have to move for their 8th grade year. That feels like a really hard time to move. And I spent a lot of time talking to friends who do transitions and people of color, and a really amazing therapist. And she was like, kids can move schools. They're going to do great. They can make new friends. She shared a story about her daughter and how she spent her entire educational career at MPS just chasing quality math, because that was the thing that she wanted to do in life. And so she changed school multiple times. So I think just being reassured that this is going to be fine, that we can do this. And then I really thought about the times and the years and the classes that my kids have had the best experiences and have made the most growth. And what I realized was that that experience was in a school that was 80% students, or a classroom that was 80% students of color, a high ESL group, and a pretty high SPED group. That their happiest year, and the year that they made the most growth emotionally and physically and academically, was in a space that I think many parents are trying to avoid, honestly. And so those two things really guided me toward toward picking more of what we know worked for our kids. And I feel really good about it.
That's great. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that impromptu. So
yeah, I've been really emotional about it this week, because I think it really forced me to look at, there's so much pressure around this, and you watch other people freaking out and you watch other people's narratives. And I was like, we were really happy in a place that worked for us. And I'm just going to drown out all the noise and go with my instincts.
Yeah, that's great. So let's transition a little bit to then what came up during public comment last night. And as many of you know, we have recently kicked off a campaign around trying to create equitable access to the highest quality teachers in Minneapolis public schools. And so we had a few people, a few of our supporters, including both of us, call in during public comment and really share with the board and the public that this is a priority that we want Minneapolis Public Schools and the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers to really take on and own, and to create the best possible solution, especially in this year of so much movement that's coming up with both students and teachers. How do we ensure that our students of color get the highest quality teachers? And we recently learned, maybe not so recently, it was in 2019, that our highest or our most experienced teachers are going to schools where that have the lowest percentage of students of color. Now, that doesn't mean every single experienced teacher, highly experienced teacher, is moving in those ways. And I'm not saying that they're making these choices specifically because there's too many students of color and they didn't love teaching students of color, but this is what our system has produced. And so we want to figure out, how do we stop that? And what this really is systemic racism and institutional racism. And, you know, we had 5 people call in during the school board meeting, 5 of the 8 public comments that were made, and they wanted to see it become a conversation for the school board. And so what ended up happening was, we didn't get a direct acknowledgement of the issue that we were bringing up, but 2 folks seemed to be really to make comments that were related to the public comments that we made. So Director Inns and Director Felder both made comments around teachers and access to quality teachers that I thought was really, really interesting and needs to be a part of the conversation. And so I actually would start with Director Felder's comments, who really talked about the importance of teachers of color. You know, she actually did acknowledge that she heard callers talk about experience, but she also wants to see us talk about teachers of color. And we 110,000% agree that teachers of color have to be a part of the equation. And we think that teachers of color definitely support, or is definitely a characteristic of quality teachers, and making sure that teachers reflect the populations that they're teaching. And so we think that also needs to be a part of this conversation around our highest quality teachers. And we want to see that being equitably distributed across the city as well. And so figuring out, what do we need to do to incentivize, to recruit and retain teachers? And that, I think that's a huge part of the teacher equity plan. But what we don't talk, and that's something that we talk about as a city as a whole, what we do not talk about, though, is the way that once they land in this district, how are they distributed? And when I say they, I mean teachers in general. Are we putting our top talent to meet the challenges of Minneapolis public schools? And for me, what we've seen in this data so far, I don't think so. So yeah, Heather, what were your thoughts? Sorry, I just went on a little rant there. But
No, I mean, I think we've, as a coalition, we've been talking about and wrestling with what makes a good quality teacher. What's the framework that we're working within? What could we change now versus what could we change then? And I think one of the key things that I've really come away with from all the conversation that we had around preparing for this was just that we often don't frame this about a student's needs, right? So we should really be setting up our district to meet the needs of the students in front of us, and to really think about that. And I've been a volunteer, which is, an interesting thing when you're a volunteer mom, what kinds of conversations you hear, maybe that you shouldn't. But I've seen the way that teachers break kids up and the way that they do things. And it's yes, there's behavior issues and there's discipline issues and there's this family and I've had this sibling and oh my gosh, it didn't go well with this mom. But I never hear those conversations for like, you know what? This kid needs literacy. Literacy is this teacher's strength. this kid's going to literacy, right? And so I think there really is an interesting opportunity right now for us to frame this. And as adults, and I know this for myself as a parent, it is so easy to make it about what works for adults. And, just to kind of bring this back down to like, we need to make these decisions not based on how many years you've been teaching, but on how many grades of reading does this child need to make up in order for him or her or they to have a quality life when they leave our district. And so I think that that's been kind of the frame around which I feel like I've been able to facilitate all of the nuances of what makes a good teacher and what doesn't. And all of that is like, at the end of the day, we need kids to be sitting in front of the teacher that is the best fit for them.
100%. And again, there are multiple characteristics that make up a quality teacher, right? Like, I do think an experienced teacher makes a difference, right? Like someone who's been in the classroom, that understands classroom management, that understands, the ins and outs of the science of learning and the science of reading, the science of math, right? And understanding those things, like those things make a difference. And the things that also make a difference are, how do you treat children, right? Like, how are you able to connect with what they're going through, and how are you able to build the best relationships with those teachers, and so, or with those students. And so there's a confluence of things that matter into that in a great teacher. And I think what our campaign specifically is about is, right now we're talking about like, this is where we see experience moving, right? This is how we see experience moving. And we know experience is an important factor in developing the academic growth and accelerating the academic growth of students, specifically students of color, right? And so what do we need to do in order to, again, meet the challenge that is presented to us, right? Like, I don't think we don't need to assign blame, and that's not what our campaign is about. But at this point, we know we have a challenge, and right now we're not organizing our talent in a way that helps to meet that challenge. We're organizing our talent in a way that maintains stability, and stability is important for so many folks and so many things. But if that's coming at the cost of students getting what they need, I don't know if that's what students actually need right now, is stability. I think what students need is someone to make sure that their needs are being met, their full needs are being met academically, socially, and emotionally.
I also think that experience can be about who you are, and that no matter what kind of parenting class I take, I am never going to have the same experience in a classroom as my children of color will have. And I think the frustrating part about this conversation is to see that really there's no clear path forward that we can actually make a difference to have people who have experience being Black, Somali American, Latinx. There's no, in the policies and the structures and the contracts that we have, there is room for a marginal amount of growth in that. And no one's talking about that seriously enough either. So it's like, okay, fine, maybe experience isn't everything, but also my kids that were never, have never experienced a teacher that has experienced what they experience in their bodies. And we aren't doing either with the kind of urgency that this conversation requires.
Right.
Anyway, we could go on and on and on about that.
But we'll move on. We'll save y'all. We'll move on. But the next conversation that was a really high priority during the board meeting last night was the budget. And we know that this budget conversation, everyone's dreading it. No one wants to talk about it. No one even wants to look at it, except for maybe Senior Officer Giap, because he knows what all of it means and knows how to make this work. And so, but this conversation happened, and man, did it feel like we were experiencing some real highs and some real lows during the budget conversation.
I mean, we heard that our fund balance, we're in compliance for the first time. That has taken diligent work. That has taken restraint. to not spend, right? When we have a lot of needs, it's not like we're not, it's not like we're looking at this and choosing between, the best plan and the best plan. We're choosing between hard things in our district right now, all hard things. And so, that was interesting. And then just seeing the fact that like what we have spent in order to do what we have during COVID and how little we've received for reimbursement on that from the federal government. It's like we've made this amazing progress in our fund balance. And PS, it's for something like this. And now it's going to be hard to see that progress go away because of a pandemic that was outside of our control. So that was one part of the budget conversation. What were your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I mean, similarly, like it's amazing that we are in compliance for the first time in several years in the fund balance. I think, and again, just we couldn't enjoy it for
Oh, I
we can't
know.
even enjoy it because we know that that money is going to go away pretty immediately. Last night, the district shared that they had about $58 million in unplanned expenses due to COVID, um, or unbudgeted, I should say, not unplanned, but unbudgeted expenses due to COVID. Um, and so that will mean that the reserve will take a hit now. And the reserve is, again, the place where we would go if we have a rainy day, right? And so this is a rainy day, but if a school building burns down, right, like that's a place where we would go to say like we need to recoup some of the money, right? We have divided government in Minnesota. If there's a state shutdown, the reserve is where we would go, the district would go to pay their people throughout the period of a shutdown, right? And so those are the types of things those are the types of reasons why we have a reserve. And again, COVID is another great reason to be able to provide devices so that we can provide academic programming. Now, the question is, are we able to reach every single student right now? And we know that, there are students that we're not seeing our usual attendance numbers. And there are some real concerns, especially amongst specific communities of color and indigenous communities around, how effective this has been up until this point. But this is why we have this money, right? Is to save for this day and soften this blow that we're about to take because of everything that's going on financially for the district.
I think Director Arneson said last night that what we've seen is the state and the federal government sort of punting on their responsibility that they've put on schools, but then they haven't circled back to say, here's how we're going to support schools. And I think, budget conversations and the budget meetings have always been really hard for me to comprehend. And I'll be honest, sometimes I sit there and I'm like, I don't know what that word means, but I feel stupid if I ask. And so, I mean, it really, for the first time last night, what I really came away with is this understanding of like, our state continues to put our city in a really dire place because they're not funding us for the needs that we have in the city. And they're just kind of saying, hey, we're the districts that we represent out here in the suburbs, their booster softball club can raise more money, than a PTA can here in Minneapolis. And that's not our problem. And I think that it's inherently racist when you look at the students that make up the majority of our student body, that they're like admittedly not giving us the amount of money that it takes to meet the needs of those students. How can that not be racist? And so I think that was something that I really comprehended for the first time last night. And I really found myself like thinking about my responsibility as a citizen of the state.
Yeah, I mean, the district definitely needs more resources. The underfunding of special education, again, year after year after year after year after year, continues to be a topic of conversation. I know spending a little bit of time at the Capitol, there's definitely some Minneapolis metro area hate. I guess hate might be a strong word, but like they just feel
Same.
like the metro area gets too much attention, too much money, causing too many problems, lots of big government, all of these things. And maybe their small Senate district, House district doesn't get the resources that they need. And maybe that's true. I don't know. That's not my lived experience, but my lived experience is seeing that we have a very, very dense population here in Minneapolis, and we have a lot of people that we have, and we have a lot of different needs to meet, and a lot of different people to serve. And so we need to figure out ways to ensure that our schools get those resources to meet those needs adequately. And and
And
I also think it's important that our district have the hard conversations that they need to have in order to structurally fix our budget. This is, you know, this is something that's in their control. They cannot control whether or not the state will give them money, right? We can't control whether the the Republicans in northern Minnesota feel like we should increase the education budget, right? They can advocate, they can do everything in their power to make sure that voices are heard, but the school board unfortunately cannot just tell the state to give the district more money. What the district and the school board can do is start to take the painful steps maybe to structurally fix our budget. And one of those painful steps might be closing schools, right? Like no one wants to talk about it. It's the boogeyman, it's the elephant in the room, whatever. But we need to have an honest conversation around like, is it feasible to have as many schools as we have open and serve as the students that we have? And right now we're spreading our resources way too thin.
yes.
And honestly, like if we can figure out a different way, if there are other structural issues that the district wants to take on, like please let us know. Like we are open to anything. But the problem is that we don't even ask the question anymore. We just say that special education is underfunded, and so we need the state to step in, or we need the federal government to step in. And that's definitely one solution. But I think Director In said this, like, or I don't know who said this, but somebody definitely said last night, we keep doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. And over and over and over again, we keep relying on the state to give us more money and hope that it will fix all of our issues. And over again, they show us that they're not going to do that. And so what is this board going to do in order to examine the structural problems in this budget, which is what the senior officer GIOP has been saying over and over again, like
For
please,
years.
we have structural issues that aren't tied to enrollment. That's the other thing. The only conversation we seem to start having inroads on is how do we increase enrollment in order to fix our structural issues? That's not fixing our structural issues. We're going to get more money from having more students, but then we'll also be needing to provide more services and provide more resources to serve that student, right? And so that's not going to get us anywhere. We need to talk about what are the structural ways that we can address the budget. And one of those seem to be closing schools, and I'd be happy to hear others.
Yeah, and then, I mean, this is a slippery slope and possibly opening up other conversations, but one thing that we have control over is climate and culture inside of our buildings, treating students and families of color with respect, academic outcomes. Those are things that we are doing nothing significant on. I know we're working on them and I know we're having honest conversations, but 33% of our Black students are proficient in literacy. It's hard to increase enrollment with that percentage. And so I hope, sometimes it feels like first of all, like there's no easy solutions. I think I've learned that from years of doing this. This is like messy, hard stuff with a lot of people who I think really want to see the right things. And also, sometimes it feels like every time there's a problem, we look to the other things for the problem and sort of the excuse. And I think we have to start having more accountability-based conversations. Department heads, and one thing I appreciate about a GEOP is that his department has taken accountability for the part that they can control. And, so I'd like to see other departments say, here's the plan, here's where we're going, here's how we're going to get there, here are the pain points, and here are the goals that are going to make us happier. And so I think we need other departments to do that. And accountability. That's all I have to say.
Yeah. I mean, to your point, right? Like, again, we have uncovered and we have shared with the board and the district and the union. Here's a problem that you have. You have all of your most experienced teachers in your widest schools. And actually, we didn't tell them that they have this problem. They told us. That's right. In a public meeting that they have this problem. And so, but they're not doing anything to mitigate, reassign that, right? And so if I'm a parent, why would I want to send my kids to the places where the least experienced teachers are going, right? And again, there's no shame in being an inexperienced teacher, but I would like to see my inexperienced teacher at least be paired with my experience, like be surrounded by a set of experienced teachers. And again, we don't need to rehash this. We already said this, right? Like, experience does not make a great teacher. Like, that's not the only thing that makes a great teacher. And I believe that 110%. But to your point around, here's a problem that you have, here's what's within your control, like, let's make it a priority to address. And I think they're doing this in small ways, right? And I think they're trying to address that within schools. I think they're trying to do whatever but like, this needs to be a full-on effort that they need to embrace. And we haven't heard anything back from the district or the board about this. And so we're hoping to hear something soon, and we can keep you all updated on that. That's my little campaign plug.
That was very subtle.
I'll bring us back. But yeah, I just think that we do need to figure out, how are we going to structurally address the issues in our budget? How are we going to, again, I think the big message for us is do what's within your control. If everyone does their job, then we will start to have better outcomes. If the state does their job and adequately funds public education across the state, they'll be doing their job. If the board does their job, then hopefully we'll start to see better policy, better accountability across the entire district. If the district leadership does their job, hopefully we'll have strong implementation of the CDD and all these other things. Teachers do their job, hopefully they'll care for every single child in their classroom, and we'll see better academic outcomes for students, specifically students of color, right? Like, if everyone just does their job and stop worrying and complaining about what everyone else isn't doing, we might get to a better place. And so that's what we're asking, and that's what we would like to start to see much more often within this district.
Yeah. Well, this was a heavy conversation. I think there are some hard things. There are some good things in our district, right? And as always, we come to this conversation to really think about, how does this decision, this group of people, this conversation, what is the outcome on students of color? And hopefully that comes across as you listen to our opinions, because everyone knows there's a ton of unsolicited opinions about Minneapolis public schools. So thanks for listening to ours.
Yeah. Thanks, Heather. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.